This is Just Right. Sweet Haven Farm, Sweet Small Town Romance, Book 3. Written by Jessie Gussman. Performed by J. Dice. Episode 12. Chapter 19. Avery pulled into the farm. Her headlights hit the house before she shut them off. Full darkness plunged down around. She sighed, both hands at the top of the wheel, before she grabbed for her second wind and shut the car off. A room for Gator had not opened up until almost 7 this evening. In the back of her head, she'd been thinking that she could maybe run home after getting him settled, and maybe throw enough decorations together to possibly still have at least a shadow of the party she dreamed of. Until he got taken to his room, grumbling and complaining, she might add, and settled. He'd completely missed supper, and the hospital cafeteria, both of them, plus the gift shop, were closed. He hadn't eaten since the morning before, so Avery ran to check on Mrs. Franks. Jillian had been caring for her in between helping at the Christmas tree cash register, grabbed a few things to make his room more cheerful, and picked up fast food for Gator, who had very casually asked where his clothes and shoes were. She, just as casually, had lied through her teeth and told him they were in the back seat of her car. Thankfully, a nurse had come in before that whopper was out of her mouth. Avery had no poker face to speak of, and she had made a point, all of her life, to keep her lying skills rusty from disuse. Today, however, a lie had seemed fitting. After all, she'd been lying to herself for a few weeks now, because she'd realized today, while she was in the hospital holding the bedpan for that grumpy, surly, sleepy man, that the reason she'd told McCoy Rodning he could leave, that she was going to take care of Gator, was not because she felt like she had to, or even that she necessarily wanted to. After all, who wants to hold a bedpan? But she couldn't get the guy out of her head, couldn't stop thinking about how much she loved being with him, and how much fun they had together. She worried about him, wanted the best for him, admired him, and, hey, she had to face it, she wanted the guy to kiss her again. So, no, she didn't stay at the hospital all day today and give up the chance to have the party she'd always dreamed about, disappointing Mrs. Franks, and losing the possible opportunity to show Fink and Ellie that the barn could make a profit because of anything rational. She stayed with Gator today, watching him sleep, listening to the doctor's instructions, heeding the nurse's warnings and making sure they didn't give him the wrong drugs, because she loved him. She loved him. He was going to leave. It had scared her at one time, but after spending so much time with Gator, she had figured one thing out. He wasn't like her father or her ex-fiancé. He might leave, but not for the next flavor of the month. And that she could live with. The nurses had told them that the doctor usually made his rounds early, so Avery got up long before dawn, checked Mrs. Franks, fed Gator's dogs, and rushed to the hospital. No light shone from the door crack under Gator's door, so she knocked softly and pushed the door open carefully.
"He was awake earlier,"
a friendly nurse said as she pushed a blood pressure machine down the hall.
"Okay, thanks,"
Avery said. She'd been blessed to have never spent the night in a hospital, so she had no idea whether she'd sleep well or not. Since Gator had spent most of the day yesterday sleeping off the effects of the anesthesia, and because he valued his independence and privacy, And because he had been in not a little pain from his foot the afternoon before, she was guessing he might not have slept well and might be just a little grumpy. She pushed the door open a little farther and slipped through. Handel's Messiah played softly. Gator, who was not supposed to be out of bed, stood at the window, staring at the waking downtown. At least his foot wasn't on the ground. He had his leg bent with his knee propped on the lone chair in the room.
Good morning,
she said softly as she walked closer. The tabletop tree she'd brought in shone cheerfully from his bedstand, and the ornaments she'd hung from the window added a festive touch. To her, anyway. Gator looked back. Hey, figured you'd be here early.
Yeah, I'd have told you before I left, but it was in one of your dozing times when they finally kicked me out.
It's what I thought. She handed him the straight black coffee that she'd gotten for him and pulled the tab on her hot chocolate. Gator leaned over and sniffed her cup. That smells good.
Christmas cookie hot chocolate. One can never have too much sugar in the morning.
Gator grunted. I was just thinking about that.
Sugar in the morning?
No, about how different you are.
Different from everyone? Or different from someone in particular?
She asked. Through everything that had happened yesterday, they had never talked about his comment mentioning this thing between us. Because of the anesthesia, maybe he didn't even remember it. She sure did, and she knew what her answer was. Different from what I'd always thought my ideal woman was.
Oh?
He seemed to be in such a contemplative mood, and she couldn't figure out whether he was thinking he'd been wrong or if he was actually explaining why they didn't fit. He waved his hand at the shiny bulbs hanging from the window, then over towards the tree and the bit of tinsel she'd arranged. All this. I've always hated decorations. What a waste of time. She drew back. If he'd have slapped her, she wouldn't have been more surprised. Knickknacks. That's what my mother calls them. I trip over them, knock them down, break stuff. I'm not graceful, and a body this size takes some space.
But you made all those decorations for your yard.
Yeah, I think that's about the time I wondered what the point was, you know? He shrugged. I knew my mother liked the stuff, and I spent a lot of time making it, but by the time I was done, I wondered why I bothered. You put the stuff out once a year. It clutters up the yard. You spend a lot of time trying to get the lights and stuff just so, only to take it down again. He hadn't been overly enthused or impressed about the party, but he'd helped her some with the decorations and had promised to help her with the decorating. And now he was saying that he hated it all? Avery squinted at him. The doctor said he'd reacted badly to the anesthesia. Maybe it had changed his personality. She made a mental note to ask the doctor if it was permanent.
So...
She hesitated, not sure she really wanted to know exactly what he was saying.
Do you want me to take the decorations down?
Gator dropped his foot from the chair and moved his body around to look at her, his brows drawn down in confusion. The lights fluttered on as a doctor walked in, a younger woman in a lab coat at his side. You, sir, are not to be out of bed. If it's completely necessary for you to be up, you are to have your leg elevated. Dr. Hess shook hands and introduced Dr. Benston. Avery read resident on her badge. Were you on your way to or from the restroom? Dr. Hess asked. Avery stifled a smile. Nice way of telling Gator to get back in bed. Gator gave her a last look, one she thought promised more conversation, before he lifted a lip at the doctor and leaned his weight on the wheeled tray before hopping to the bed. And yes, Avery noticed that he barely glanced at the young, good-looking female resident. The older doctor pointed his clipboard at Avery. "If you want his foot to heal correctly, you are going to have to keep him in bed, or at the very least, off his feet. When he's sitting, it needs to be propped, and he should not stand any more than it takes for him to walk from his bed to the chair to the restroom and back."
"Yes, sir,"
Avery said, like she'd given Gator permission to get out of bed, like he'd have gotten back in if she had told him to, and like she hadn't heard it all yesterday. "It was all me," Gator said, as though he could read her mind. The doctor turned serious eyes on Gator. "I know. Sometimes patients I work with aren't going to listen to anyone. Don't look so surprised. I've been in this a long time, and some people just don't listen. You're borderline." He narrowed his eyes at Gator. "My instinct tells me that if your wife wants it, you'll kill yourself to give it to her. That's why I was giving her the instructions." Gator's eyes slanted to her. There was not a hint of a smile on his face. That slow burn in the pit of her stomach sparked and leaped. He looked back at the doctor. Pegged. Avery's heart launched into a stunning rendition of Ave Maria. As though he could hear it, one side of Gator's mouth quirked up. Avery turned toward the window to hide her own grin. The doctor droned on about Gator staying off his feet and being careful not to bump the foot, and things to look for with his anesthesia issues. Avery tried to pay attention around the thumping of her heart and the heat in her stomach, and the nerves that still twanged because of Gator's decoration comments. After telling Gator he should be discharged by noon, the doctor and the resident left. Avery stood by the window, one finger trailing on the manger figurine she'd placed there. Silence descended heavily in the room, broken only by the occasional clicking of the machines near the head of Gator's bed. Avery looked around, at the sparkly wreath that hung on the back of the door, at the colored string of lights on the wall near Gator's bed, at the stained glass throw in green, red, and gold across the bottom of Gator's bed, at the iPod docking station where she'd been streaming Christmas music.
"Maybe I went a little overboard on the decorations."
It had taken 5 trips from her car to his room to carry everything. That was probably a little excessive. "Come here," Gator said, softening his command with a quieter plea. "Please." Avery smiled at Gator's barely polite command. She stepped toward the bed. He reached out a hand and clasped hers. "I hate not being able to go where I want to."
"This will be good practice in self-control."
Gator gave a derisive snort. "It's going to take some soul-searching before I determine whether it will be worth the full use of my foot for the rest of my life versus not being stuck in one place for the next 6 weeks."
"Stop. 6 weeks versus the rest of your life."
6 weeks would put them past the new year. She'd be gone. 3 weeks with Gator versus the rest of her life without him. The time was an easy choice when she was thinking about his foot. But what about her possible life partner? Possible was the key word. "I was saying earlier about the decorations," Gator began.
"Yes, I know. You hate them."
Avery tried to pull her hand away. No, that's what I was saying. It's not that I spent a lot of time thinking about the perfect woman for me, but I guess if I had, someone like Kristen would have come pretty close. And I'd wager a guess that your idea of a perfect mate never looked like me. Avery grunted.
No, you're right.
His thumb stroked her hand, sending charges of excitement skimming up her arm. So, after spending so much time with you, I realized last night that I was starting to see the world from a different angle. I mean, it's nice to be with people who see everything the same way you do. No arguments. They laughed together. But no growth either. Because I laid here and looked at the things you'd done. The homey blanket you'd laid across my legs. The Christmas lights sparkling off of the bulbs you'd hung. Just everything you'd done to make my room look comfortable, festive, and pretty. Before I spent time with you, I would never have appreciated it, or even noticed, really.
Maybe that's why opposites attract.
Sure. Maybe that's why whoever designed us built us that way. Because we need to be more than our own opinion. Because being with people, a person, who is different than I am, helps me be better.
You're saying I help you be better?
Yeah. I'm better now than I was before I met you. He smirked. But if you'd have told me that from the top of the light pole, I don't think I would have believed you at the time.
So, are you going to be rubbing that light pole thing in for the rest of my life? She asked with an eye roll.
Gator's look was serious. Am I?
You're right about our differences. I fed your dogs last night and actually enjoyed it. I looked over the backyard at where your mom said the old hatchery used to be, and I could see the potential. I would never be thinking like that if I hadn't met you.
She smiled.
There's a lot more about you that I like because it's different from me.
Yeah? She shrugged.
I like how you're bigger than me. I feel safe and protected with you. Actually, I like how you protect me. You drove me through the snowstorm. But I also like how we work together. Your strengths buffer my weakness, and mine yours, maybe. Just that idea makes me happy.
So, you didn't really answer the question.
What question?
She fingered the Christmas throw. He squeezed her hand. The one about whether I'm going to be teasing you about the light pole for the rest of my life.
Knock, knock.
McCoy stuck his head in the door.
Is everyone in here decent?
I am, and I'm working on her, Gator called. Come on in.
We both know the opposite is true between you two. Give her 50 years to work on you. Might be close to decent by then.
McCoy grinned as he sauntered in.
Hey, Avery. Hello, McCoy.
Avery greeted Gator's friend, then tried to pull away. Gator tugged on her hand. McCoy's eyes went to their clasped fingers. I actually am interrupting something here, aren't I? Avery shook her head.
No, not at all. You come right in. Gator needs someone here who's big enough to make him stay off of that foot.
That's not what the doctor said, Gator said in a low, almost husky voice.
Let's not argue about that now,
Avery said. She gave McCoy another smile.
I appreciate you coming to visit.
Can't let my friend languish in the hospital all alone, not with all these cute nurses hanging around. And I'm pretty sure that one good-looking blonde was a doctor. I wouldn't know, Gator said. I'm not going there. McCoy said with a wink. What's this about the big party being canceled? Lots of people in town are really looking forward to it. Avery lifted her hand and shrugged.
My help broke his foot.
And my mom was in the hospital, too. Avery gave up her party to take care of us both.
Jillian helped too,
Avery said. She didn't deserve all the credit, and she really didn't deserve to be painted in such an unselfish light. Giving up the party hadn't been as easy as Gator made it sound. Maybe that was part of the reason she went so far overboard decorating Gator's room. The whole town is disappointed. That's all I heard about when I made my rounds yesterday. McCoy shoved his hands in his pockets.
Maybe we can do something after Christmas,
Avery said. Although if she was going to take the position in D.C., she would be too busy trying to find a place, and was she considering turning down the position? Chapter 20. Avery shut her car off in front of Fink and Ellie's house. Because of some kind of computer glitch which had caused a paperwork snag, Gator hadn't been released until early evening. Impatient wasn't a strong enough word to describe his attitude all afternoon. But now he was home, and she was back at the farm, thinking she'd relieve Jillian, who'd been putting in way more hours at the tree farm than anyone had expected. Only there were lights on in the barn, and a lot of cars parked outside of it. So Avery had driven by the farm office, curious. Now, as she walked down through the dark yard toward the lights, she could hear voices and Christmas music playing. At least if Fink had hired someone to gut the interior, they probably wouldn't be playing Christmas music, would they? Avery slid open the man door and stepped inside, hardly believing her eyes. Ellie, who was quite crafty herself, stood on a ladder hanging the pine swags Avery had just finished making last week. Other town ladies bustled around, setting up tables, hanging lights, arranging chairs along the knee wall, and all the while they checked the pictures that lay on the center table, making sure they had everything just as it was at Mrs. Franks' engagement party. Mayor Higham did a double take, then threw up a hand in a wave, before leaning over and saying something to the man he was hanging the candle holders with. He set the holder down, then strode over. "Avery, does this mean Gator is finally home?"
Yes, I just dropped him off.
That's great. That's great. Avery looked around.
So, what's all this?
Well, we're decorating for the party tomorrow, of course.
But
She'd canceled it. On Facebook. It's not like anyone would have missed that. I know, you had to cancel it. But everyone in town has watched how hard you've worked, not just on the party, but on helping Fink and Ellie when Fink had his little mishap this summer, and how you've worked with Mrs. Franks, and how you've picked up the slack when Harper and Wyatt went to Chile. It takes all of that. Successful small businesses, neighbors helping neighbors, and reasons to celebrate and get together to keep a small town like ours thriving. He gestured across the barn. Right now, you see neighbors helping neighbors. Avery just stared at him. This was the man who put her on the dunking board. As though he could read her mind, or more likely her face, Mayor Higham said, "You were a great sport at the town Christmas celebration." Good manners made Avery say,
"Thank you."
The mayor clasped his hands together. "Jillian is really the one who organized this, but I, and the townspeople also, think it's a great idea. It's things like this that pull everyone together. We're all on board trying to recreate Patty Frank's engagement party. Patty's been a fixture in our town for years, and she's well liked by everyone. People admire you for helping her." That people admired her was a shock to Avery.
"I thought everyone thought I was odd."
"Well, we do." Avery snorted. "After you've lived here for 50 years, people might start treating you like you're almost normal."
50 years?
Or so.
It's not going to take that long.
Ellie slipped her arm around Avery.
"I think the good mayor forgets that you're family."
"Oh, yes, I did forget. There's not much resemblance." Avery turned to hug Ellie.
"Thank you so much, Ellie. This looks exactly the way I'd pictured it."
Ellie hugged her back.
"I couldn't let all those beautiful decorations go to waste. I should have known. Plus, this could be really good business for the farm."
Ellie looked around approvingly.
"That's what I thought. I hadn't realized how popular it's become to renovate old barns and turn them into bookable venues."
She nodded.
"This old place fixes up pretty nicely. I've already had 2 people ask about weddings here, and one ask about having their reunion. Plus, I overheard a group of teens talking about having the prom here."
Avery's heart soared.
"I knew it!" "I don't think it will be hard to get Fink on board, but we'll have to talk to him. Maybe after the party?"
Avery grinned.
"It's still on then? Tomorrow evening?"
"Yep. You don't think we're doing all this work for nothing, do you?" Gator sat in a corner with his foot propped up on a chair, feeling more than a little bit surly. After all, he hadn't even been able to drive himself and his mother to this party, let alone pick up his girlfriend? He loved the pairing of Avery and wife, but in truth, he didn't even know if he could call her his girlfriend. If he'd been able to walk, he could steal her away for a few minutes and get their relationship straightened out. And kiss her. Mostly kiss her. But with his confounded foot, he was stuck here, watching. The words he'd said to Avery in the hospital came back to him. Words about learning to appreciate the things he hadn't appreciated before. He tried to stop his negative thoughts. The barn was beautiful. Even his old self could have appreciated that. Candles flickered from the boxes Avery and he had built. And, because it was an old barn, they had discreetly placed at least 10 or so fire extinguishers in easy-to-reach, but hard-to-see, places. Friends of Avery's and local musicians had combined to provide live Christmas music. Some brave souls had even ventured out onto the dance floor, such as it was. Still, the flickering glow from the open flames lent a romantic atmosphere to the whole party. There were more lights than just candles, and lots of shiny bulbs and garland to pull the reflections in and toss them out again in happy, shimmering waves of color and sparkle. A Christmas tree in the corner had real gifts under it, and several fascinated children had already picked up the wrap packages, shaking them and trying to peek through the slits in the paper. He'd laughed at that, because that would have been him 20 years ago. But best of all were the 2 women standing together. Avery glowed in a sparkling black dress with her arm around his mother, who wore an outfit very similar to the one she'd worn in the old picture he'd seen of her standing beside the man who'd sired him. His mother, the woman who'd loved him and raised him, shone with happiness and health. Hard to tell that she'd just been in the hospital only days before. It was hard to take his eyes off Avery, too. She sparkled with life and laughter. He didn't know how he hadn't realized before that she had been doing all this work, not just because she loved decorating and organizing and planning parties, but because she knew how much it would mean to his mother. To see his mother smiling and looking so radiantly healthy and happy made him love Avery even more. He loved Avery. He'd almost realized it that night in the hospital, when he'd seen how much she cared for him by the way she'd fixed up his room. All that work just to make him feel comfortable and happy. How could he not love someone who put others ahead of themselves so consistently? He was on unpaid leave, but he'd called his boss earlier in the day and given his 2-week notice. He didn't know how Avery felt, but in the end, it hadn't mattered. He was going to pursue her. If she didn't love him, he was hoping she'd eventually be able to. But he didn't have any hope of convincing her from Montana. Since there was no way she could move to Montana, and there was no way he'd expect her to, that left one choice. He had to give up his job. Which he had done. Now, somehow, he had to talk to her, but he couldn't walk, couldn't dance, couldn't even get her a drink. So he continued to sit in the corner, his leg duly propped up, frustration burning in his chest. After what felt like hours, but was more like 15 minutes, McCoy strolled over, carrying 2 cups. "Hey, Gator, I'm kind of surprised you even came. Didn't the doc say to stay off that foot?" McCoy handed him one of the 2 cups he carried. "Thanks." Gator took the drink. "Couldn't miss Avery's party, even if I can't participate." "What's up with you two, anyway?" "Meaning?" "It was pretty obvious yesterday that there's something there. Are you two a thing?" Gator thought about hedging, but figured there was no point. "I'd like to be, but we need to talk and it's pretty much obviously not going to happen tonight." He took a sip of his drink while watching Avery. She'd led his mother to the dance floor. The mayor came up beside them and spoke. Avery smiled while his mother laughed. "I think your mother is blushing," McCoy said, his drink hovering halfway to his mouth. "I guess the mayor is about her age." "Younger, actually, but your mother has always acted much younger than she is. I remember that from high school." Shaking his head, McCoy downed his punch in a few swallows. "Yeah, she's a good woman." McCoy didn't know about his mother and his history. There had never been any need to tell him. Still wasn't. As the hours dragged by, Avery came over several times to check on him, but each time she was pulled away by someone who needed more food or help with the music or new candles to replace the ones that gutted out. She was everywhere, laughing with guests while keeping everything behind the scenes running smoothly. She balanced the role of party coordinator like a pro. If only he could help her, but at least he got to watch and admire. As midnight rolled around, the mayor came to Gator's corner and asked if it was okay if he took Mrs. Franks home. Slightly flummoxed, Gator stammered out a yes. It worked out well, since fatigue darkened his mother's laugh lines, and she would have had to wait for Avery to take her, since Gator couldn't. A small army of people gathered up the leftover food, but Avery shooed away anyone who tried to clean up, saying that she'd get it in the morning. After standing at the door, talking to Fink and Ellie for a good 20 minutes, Avery floated to his side. The candles had been blown out, and the overhead lights were turned off, but the strings of Christmas lights still flickered. Silent Night played in the background. He smiled up into her glowing face. "I think you can call your party a success. Her eyes sparkled.
I wanted to recreate your mother's engagement party. I think it worked. Actually, the mayor was really paying close attention to her this evening.
I noticed.
Of course. I'm so sorry about your foot.
She sat beside him. Yeah. He dropped his arm around her back and she laid her head on his shoulder. You were amazing tonight. Everything you did was amazing. He indicated the still beautiful decorations and the empty barn floor.
Do you really think so?
He squeezed her shoulder. I do. And I think that everyone that was here tonight feels the same.
Fink and Ellie asked me if I would accept a position of events coordinator on the farm. Part-time as needed, of course.
Wow, that's great, Gator said cautiously. She could probably do that from D.C.
Fink wanted to talk to you because he'd already asked you to tear the barn down, but I told him if you had any problem with it at all, I'd hold off until it was resolved.
He'd managed to put his mother's financial problems out of his mind. The job he'd been working on would take care of some of it, enough to keep it out of collections. Then he'd just keep chipping at the rest.
Your mom was kind of the person of honor tonight. There was a jar for donations for her medical bills.
Oh, really? That was news to him.
Yeah. Several businessmen and the mayor made substantial donations. Jillian and Ellie are going to count it and let us know.
His chest was suddenly too small to hold the fullness of his heart. That's great, he managed to say. He turned in his chair and took Avery by the shoulders, making her face him. You were beautiful tonight.
Thank you.
She blushed and looked down. He took a finger and pushed her chin up. I love you. Her eyes grew big. I love the way your heart is in serving others, how you enter a room and make it better just by your presence, how you're funny and sweet and sassy, and I wish I could have participated in your party tonight. Holding you would have made it perfect for me.
I love you too. That's what I was trying to tell you. Fink and Ellie offered me a job. It's only part-time, but if I can book the barn and fill up the calendar, I can work myself into full-time. In the meantime, there's a music opening at a private school not far away that Fink just told me about. He can give me a recommendation, and I might not get it, but
I don't want you to give up your dream.
I realized that playing in a symphony isn't my dream anymore. I can't move to Montana, but I'll be here when you come to visit your mother.
I'm not going back to Montana. She tilted her head. I gave my notice today. Her head swung back and forth slowly.
What are you going to do?
Nothing right now. He indicated his leg. But Brett offered me a job with his construction company, and I've been tossing around the idea of opening up my pap's old fish hatchery. He did construction and raised fish on the side. It's what made me go into conservation to begin with.
But you liked your job, didn't you?
His hand cupped her cheek. I like you more.
But I don't want you to have to give up your job for me,
she cried. You know, maybe being married once helped me to see things a little more clearly. But I see it like this. I made the mistake of thinking that a woman who was just like me would make the best partner for me. In hindsight, it's obvious that I missed the red flags I should have seen. I didn't notice the defects in her personality because I was focused on our hobbies and interests. With that in mind, I don't think it's nearly as important that we share the same interests. We can learn to like each other's pastimes. Your character is what is so attractive to me. He grinned. That, and you're a darn good kisser.
No, I definitely need to practice kissing.
No better time than the present. He lowered his head. Epilogue. A small brass ensemble played wedding music which drifted into the small room that used to be a granary. Chairs had been set up, filling the newly renovated barn floor. Not only had the insurance paid for the new roof, but the money had included new beams and a new floor. In all, it was over half of the cost of the renovations. Avery patted Gladys and Finch on their heads. Since she didn't have a dad, Fink had volunteered to walk her down the aisle. But after talking about it, Gator and she had decided there really wasn't anyone to give her away. So Gladys and Finch were going to escort her to her groom. She peeked in the door. Gator stood at the front, his foot completely healed. The doctor had given him the go-ahead to take his boot off last week. McCoy Rodning stood beside him as best man. They decided to keep the wedding party small and intimate. Everyone was seated. Mrs. Franks sat beside Fink and Ellie and their children in the front row. A few guests checked the time on their phones. If Avery had hers, she'd be doing the same. Where was Jillian? She'd been there, helping Avery arrange her dress not 5 minutes ago. She'd seemed a little flustered, and Avery had asked her if everything was okay. She'd said it was. Suddenly, the door to the old granary flew open and Jillian flew in.
I'm so sorry,
she whispered.
It's okay,
Avery said. She hadn't minded the extra few moments to reflect on the huge step she was taking. Too quickly, some said.
I knew there was something wrong. Tell me.
Jillian bit her lip. She glanced toward the barn floor despite the fact that the door was closed.
McCoy Rodning is the animal control officer. I know that. He's also the best man. And he's waiting on us.
Jillian pulled both her lips between her teeth and bit down. She drew in a shaky but determined breath.
There's an elephant in the barnyard.
Avery blinked.
I'm sorry. I thought you said there's an elephant in the barnyard. I did.
Avery put her hand on Jillian's forehead. The flu season had been mild until the beginning of March. Jillian obviously had a fever. A high one. But her forehead was cold.
You are hallucinating, honey.
She put a hand on her hip.
Are you doing drugs? Please, you can't tell anyone.
She swallowed, then spoke fast.
I'll walk up the aisle. This is your wedding day and I love you. I want it to be so beautiful, but I need to hide her. Her name's Heidi, by the way, and she's the sweetest thing. The elephant is Heidi? Yes, we were in Mexico together. I worked with her for years.
Jillian shook her head.
I don't have time to explain. I'll stand beside you, but I need to leave. Just go. This is relaxed anyway. No one will care. McCoy will notice. We didn't have a rehearsal, but he still knows I'm supposed to be there. I'll say you were hallucinating.
Which could very well be true.
But I don't understand what the problem is. Avery, you can't keep an elephant in your backyard. It's illegal. They'll take her. McCoy will take her.
Avery fingered her pearl earrings.
What are you going to do? I don't know.
She smoothed her hands down her dress.
But come on. The next thing I'm going to do is watch my best friend get married to the most perfect man in the world for her.
Jillian opened the door and started out.
Don't forget to smile,
she whispered as she started down the aisle. Like that would happen. Just looking at Gator made her grin. And when he caught sight of her standing in the open doorway, his teeth flashed in his tanned face. Avery took a deep breath through her nose, smelling the scent of new wood and polish. The brass band began to play her song, and she stepped out, toward the man whom she knew would never leave, toward the rest of her life. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great Jessie Gussman audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.